Going on YouTube, Andrew Miller and Shane Black from Hook'emHeadlines.com. We are coming back at you today with another NFL draft scouting report video for y'all. This is the third one in the series now. We've already done Marvin Overshone and Rashawn Johnson. Today we are looking at the fifth-year senior defensive lineman Moro Ojomo. He is the first of, I believe it's going to be two defensive linemen that we have in this series, the other one being Keandre Coburn. But this one probably is going to be one of our more straightforward scouting report videos. He's got the trajectory at Texas is almost the most interesting part of this entire video, I think. I do think that, some of the tidbits and information that we can give you all here is going to be some interesting stuff, especially if you're maybe watching this on draft night or, combine time, or he's playing in the East-West Shrine game right now. So if you're really digging in deep, hopefully we got some tidbits of information here for y'all. That will be useful. So, I'll jump right into it. Just talking about his recruitment, wasn't a super high profile recruitment for Texas by any means. He was a four-star kid that signed in the 2018 class, so a good while ago at this point. He was recruited initially as a defensive tackle. He was about 6'3", 285 coming out of high school in Katy in Texas. And, he never really ended up putting on a ton of weight after his recruitment. I think at this point he's still 6'3", 6'4", maybe 290, 300. So the measurables haven't changed a whole lot since he was recruited out of high school. But when he first arrived on campus, he wasn't the most hyped up kid in the 2018 class. He was part of a very strong class for Texas under Tom Herman, no doubt. But he came in the same class as Keandre Coburn. Trying to see if there were any other defensive tackles, but Daniel Carson, Byron Vaughns, if any of these names are ringing a bell. But I think the biggest of the defensive linemen in that class or edge rushers was definitely Joseph Osai. And so, he's been around for a long time. A lot of those names, if you're a Texas fan, should probably strike a chord. But, from his first impressions on campus, I don't have a whole lot because he was one of the more underrated guys in the 2018 class. He didn't really make a big splash until 2019 or 2020. Shane, I don't know if you have anything else you wanted to dig into on there.
No, yeah. It seemed, I think you kind of knew when he was recruited, it's going to be a little more of a project. Height and weight pretty much the same when he came in 2018, but his body has gone over a transformation, which obviously been in a strength and conditioning and meal plan program in college for 5 years. That'll happen. But he wasn't, which is I kind of almost speaks to Moro's. He wasn't always the most hyped up guy, and his progression just year over year was fun to watch. But first year and coming out of high school, he wasn't the guy that I thought was going to turn into a 30-game starter for Texas.
No, he was actually, I think that he wasn't a great schematic fit for a lot of the defensive coordinators that he played for under Tom Herman. There were a lot of different ways that he was utilized at Texas. And under Tom Herman, he was more utilized on, if I'm not mistaken here, if utilized at all, because he didn't even get his first sack until the 2020 season. He got a significant number of reps in 2019, but I believe in 2019 he was lining up more as a straight up nose tackle. And I never thought that was the best fit for him. Obviously, he graded out pretty well, but that's just because he's very sound in his assignments. He holds his lane pretty well unless he's double teamed. We'll get into this more later, but I just thought that defensive tackle, depending on where you line him up at the line of scrimmage, which gap he's in, he can fill that role pretty well. But he's not a nose tackle. He just doesn't have the size for it, and so I didn't think the fit was great there. But then, you end up getting Pete Kwiatkowski coming into the picture, and some of the usage for Ojomo started getting a lot more conducive to his skill set. He started playing more in a true defensive end role, sometimes lining up in a 5-tech, and that's where his production started to started to come to life a little bit. It was a slow transition for him initially when PK was coming into the fold. I think just like it was for a lot of the players on this Texas defense during the 2021 season. But, if you look back on his numbers, 2021 was still one of his most productive campaigns. Maybe not from a pass rushing standpoint, but from like run defense, it was the highest graded season for him in run defense up until that point. He was missing some tackles here and there, but he was also getting a lot of stuffs. Again, that's where you really started to see him being able to kind of get that feel for one position, because up until that point, he really hadn't taken reps and consistently played at one position year over year at any point at Texas. So, I thought that he showed potential in 2021, and man, that really came to life in 2022.
He's one of those guys that, Texas can hang their hat on. Solid development. You mentioned it too. I mean, he had 3 defensive coordinators and 3 defensive line coaches in his 5 years in Austin. So, I mean, it shows that, he was adaptable, he's versatile. And once he kind of found that right scheme fit and the coaching staff started using him in the right way, he flourished as, one of the best defensive linemen in the conference in 2022.
I guess the point I'm trying to get to here to wrap this all up first time on the 40 is that he really found his stride this past season. Whether you want to look at it in terms of metrics or just the actual eye test, kind of a hybrid between a defensive tackle and a defensive end. Texas played a lot of 3-down fronts, and he was one of the most dominant forces up front. And that sounds weird, but like he wasn't double teamed a whole lot because he'd be on the field with a guy like Byron Murphy or Keandre Coburn when they were the ones more often getting double teamed up the middle. And Ojomo was able to get some more advantageous matchups. And he's so consistent and he holds his gap so well, and he's got such good hands that he was able to really wreak havoc on a consistent basis. 2 stats that really had stuck out to me, they really just put an exclamation point on his senior year at Texas. So if you look year over year, he missed about 15% of his tackle attempts in 2021. But then in 2021, he cut that in half. Or excuse me, in 2022, he cut that in half with just 7.1% missed tackle rate. That to me speaks volumes of just like the level of consistency that he brought to the table. But if you want to look at it above all else, it was the fact that he was the highest graded interior defensive lineman in the Big 12. That should speak for itself in terms of how good he turned out to be for what it seems out of nowhere. It seemed like for the first 3 or 4 years on campus that he was like maybe an average to slightly above average defensive lineman, just another guy that was in the rotation that had something left in the tank, you felt like. And then he turned into, if you're just looking at the numbers, the most consistent and one of the most versatile defensive linemen in the entire conference. And so from that perspective, the way that he was able to fit this role and that he was able to really hit his stride in the last, I'd say, 18 months is truly impressive. But yeah, let's kind of pivot here to talk about some of his strengths that he brings to the table if you're just kind of looking at his NFL draft profile. And I guess the first thing I would start out with here is the hands. I think the hand placement, how good he is at getting kind of that positioning at the point of attack, especially if he's just facing up against one offensive lineman. We'll get to the problem with him getting in double teams later, but if he's going up just one-on-one with an offensive lineman, he's got a pretty good array of not just moves to be able to shed blocks, but also he's just very, very quick with his hands. He's got a very strong upper body. And if you combine those two, that creates a whole new way to be able to get past opposing blockers and wreak havoc in opposing teams' backfields, whether that's stopping the run, getting pressure on opposing quarterbacks, or even just taking up space in the trenches. That's definitely something that he excels at. That would be like the thing that really sticks out to me, Shane. I didn't know if you had like in terms of like technique or even even the hand placement, if that's anything you had an opinion on.
Yeah, so what you'll notice when watching Ojomo is like he's not the strongest, he's not the fastest, so you can't really rely on that athleticism or the strength of a bull rush to get by. So you mentioned the hands are kind of his major weapon when it comes to shedding off offensive linemen. He also has, from what I've seen, pretty strong football IQ. Always seems to locate the ball pretty well. Solid gap integrity. You hinted at it, but there are loses that gap integrity. But for the most part, I feel like he always kind of knows where to be and is in that spot. I mean, you can see him struggle when he gets overpowered but I think just knowing where to be and then kind of using the tools that he has at his disposal is one really big plus for me. But have that, strength or speed that you'll see with guys who go in, the first or second round in the draft at this position.
Yeah, I think the thing that's holding a lot of people back from projecting him is like even like a early to middle day 3 pick is maybe the limited usage in different spots along the defensive front. I'll speak to versatility here in a certain respect. I think there's a number of ways you can look at the way that Ojomo could be defined as versatile. You mentioned that his football IQ and gap integrity are definitely strengths of his, and I do very much agree with that. I think where I would bring versatility into the fold is talking about his ability to still stand out in his role as a pass rusher and in run defense. A lot of his strengths translate in both those ways. Where, I mean, obviously being able to find the football is a major strength in run defense. That's like the first goal that you have to be able to know where to go, and you have to be able to like have the physical tools to get to that spot in the role you're assigned. And I mean, for Ojomo, if he's put in the right situation, like I think for him that's going to be probably either a 4 tech or a 5 tech, more on the outside of the line. I just don't think the interior is going to be the spot for him in the NFL. Adding more weight might not be the right way to treat it for him. I think if you saw anything in Texas that would help you understand that point, it's the fact that his measurables are almost the same in terms of height and weight that they were when he was recruited, and he was able to find a level of success to become an all Big 12 caliber performer and the highest rated interior defensive lineman in the Big 12. Got to be in, I think, kind of that 5 tech role where he might not necessarily be a stand-up edge rusher because he just doesn't have that sort of like quickness. He doesn't have that sort of bend off the edge that you would want, and he just doesn't really have the length for it either. I don't think he does have a good wingspan for 6'3", so that's definitely something that gives him extra reach from more of like the interior defensive line. But like I think that 5 tech is the right fit for him, where like he's still going to get some advantageous matchups. He's not going to get double teamed a whole lot. Like I think he's still going to surprise a lot of people with how quick a lot of his moves are. Again, strong upper body, strong core, good hands means that he's able to shed blocks a lot quicker than a lot of teams are expecting. And you can create some havoc up the inside with that. I think a lot of people don't think about the amount of inside blitz stunts that happen in the NFL. It's not just nowadays, but that's something that always has. Defensive coordinators try to get tricky and find a way to, get an edge, and that's going to be one of the ways to do it. I'll cap it at this for this portion of the strengths is that, one thing that was often overlooked at Texas for Ojomo was how good he was at making the people around him better. He so rarely made mistakes that were like detrimental to his teammates that when I don't have on off the field stats for this like you would in basketball, but I'm sure if you did, the results would be insane. The guy was just someone that very, very rarely misread a play or misdiagnosed a read. I, you know, I speak to his consistency similar to the way that I would speak about Roschon's, just in the sense that like he never took a down off. He maximized the play on every single down. And I wouldn't say that about a whole lot of other players on the Texas defense in the last few seasons. So, like I said, from the perspective of standing out in your own role and maximizing what you do, Ojomo's a solid get. I think the floor on him, if he's put in the right scheme, is also very high. If there's a play where there's a lot of pre-snap movement and there's some misdirection, counter, whatever that be, someone that can read and react and adjust in play and still be able to find the football, Ojomo's your guy. His ability to not only hold his spot but be able to get to the ball while having to change directions quicker than most interior defensive linemen that you would find even in this draft class. I think that's a major strength of his. And really the last thing I wanted to say was his burst off the line of scrimmage is often something that is also overlooked. Some people might discount the fact that he's, a guy that's 6'3", 290, 300 in kind of that range, probably closer to 290, if even that big. He's pretty quick. His short area quickness is something that you cannot discount. And with those long arms, that gives him a bigger tackle radius than most people would anticipate. And so, like I said, that's just another underrated strength of his, where if he ends up in the right scheme, he can do a lot more damage than I think a lot of people will be expecting him to. And that's dangerous when you're talking about just wreaking havoc in the trenches. So like I said, in terms of just standing out in your role and maximizing your ability when a lot of people are discounting what you can do, and Ojomo's got it at the next level, I think.
The official wingspan, I mean, we'll get numbers at, hopefully pro day or at the right now I'm seeing a little under 7 feet. So that is pretty incredible if true. I mean, I got 83 and 3/8. So unless my math's wrong. But
yeah, I have an athletic report from just after his recruitment was over that 82-inch wingspan.
Wow. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. 82-inch wingspan. He needs to be playing like a 2-guard. Shed like 100 pounds and just go play in the NBA.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. That's funny. But yeah, that is that's gonna be pretty high up there, measurable wise compared to the rest of the guys at his position. Especially he's only 6'3", 6'3.5".
So I guess transition here now. Hell of a transition to his weaknesses. I mean, the weaknesses we've talked about it here and there. Like the first one that jumps out to me is like if he's playing on the interior, or if like a team tries to move to double team him, I think it's kind of game over. He's going to get pushed off the ball. Double teaming means to just he's kind of taken out of the play. He's not like a Coburn or Murphy or even Devondre Sweat, some other defensive lineman at Texas, where he might still be able to move some bodies or at least hold his gap if he's double teamed. Ojomo is probably going wherever that double team wants him to go. So that would be my first one. The second one would be I think the lack of scheme versatility. I mentioned it earlier that I don't think there's a ton of ways that you can utilize him outside of a few of a couple of the gaps he can cover and a few of the techniques that he can line up in pre-snap at the line of scrimmage. There were a lot of people talking about using him as an edge rusher at Texas. I just did not think that was the best way to utilize him. As an edge rush, if he was lined up as an edge rusher, I was trying to find the games where the predominant number of snaps for him from PFF, where he was lined up as an edge rusher, what his pass rush grade was, and he graded out in the bottom 40% in the Big 12 in pass rushing grades. So I don't think that's the right role for him. That leads to a bigger point of scheme versatility isn't fantastic. And I'll just say, I don't think I just don't think that the straight line speed, even the chase down speed is all that great. Those would be my major 3 weaknesses.
I think, all in all, it's just that the speed and strength we see from the defensive linemen that get picked on day 1 and day 2, Ojomo doesn't have that. That doesn't mean he's not a good player, but he makes up for it with other intangibles, with that nearly 7-foot wingspan with his hand fighting ability. But he's just, you mentioned it right at the end. He's not going to be like a Myles Garrett that you see come running 40 yards down the field to make a tackle. That's just not who Ojomo is. He's good in tight spaces. If you run by him, he's going to wrap you up and bring you down, but he's not, chasing you around. He's not making plays in that sense of it. So, yeah, I think, when a team drafts him, or if you're a Texas fan watching this, just knowing what you're getting here, don't expect him to, be the next Myles Garrett or Bosa or Hassan Reddick. Ojomo's a guy who can fit in 3-5 technique and get strong, solid reps, but he's not going to do anything that really wows you.
This is the last thing I'll say before and actually this serves as a good transition point, kind of an interlude, if you will, to our projection of him in the NFL. But, Ojomo to me is an interesting case when you think about like defensive linemen at Texas now versus defensive linemen like 3 years ago, even 2 years ago. Hell, even last year we didn't have what was it? Not even a single draft pick last year. So I bring that up to say like to be in a more positive direction. Like defensive line all of a sudden is getting developed at Texas. I mean, Ojomo, if you looked at if he had entered the draft last year, holy crap, would that be a difference between last year and this year? Whereas like I think now he's probably projecting more as like a 6th or 7th round pick. I'll get that out of the way now for me. I think if he went into the NFL draft like 2 years ago, you're looking at like a situation like a Puna Ford or like a Charles Omenihu, where like these guys that if they were developed properly or like were put in the right scheme and used that way on a consistent basis, that they probably would have. I mean, Charles Omenihu could have been like a day 2 pick. Like you're seeing what he can do now with the Niners. It's insane. Yeah. Osai finally, like I think Chris Ash started to get things right a little bit in 2020, at least more so than Todd Orlando in the previous years. And so the point I'm making here is that like Ojomo, I think you know what his ceiling probably is, but my projection for him is ultimately like if he ends up in the right scheme, he's going to be the type of guy that surprises by getting maybe like 5 to 7 TFLs and maybe 1 or 2 sacks. Like that fits a role really, really well. And all of a sudden in like year 2 is already getting like starter to second team reps just in like I said, a very specific role. But that I think that's where he will ultimately thrive.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's a great point you make because I think we mentioned this off the top, but maybe didn't hit it as hard. Yeah, if he would have came out after the 2021 season, he was not going to be drafted. He would have been a UDFA and probably would have made his way and having a solid NFL career like we've seen from the guys you've mentioned. But yeah, I think he's worked his way up, maybe even a little higher. I might be a little more bullish on him, but I'd say like 5th round is where I think he'll get taken. I think he could work on a team that has like a real contender that has a lot of veterans across the defensive line that he can just kind of come in, learn a little bit. You're not really taking much of a risk with him, and hopefully you can raise that ceiling a little bit, surrounding him with some of the best in the league at that position, because he's a guy that you want on a 53-man roster that's ready to compete. Kind of like we mentioned in the Roshan Johnson video, like he's just a solid like guy to have on your 53. We mentioned this throughout the whole video. He's gonna make the smart play. He's a high IQ football player. He's got solid gap integrity, and I think that's really gonna stand out to GMs and scouts when they're taking players off the board in April. So I'm gonna go with a 5th-round draft pick. And
but I mean, just that advantage that Texas now has from that solidarity on the defensive staff is it makes a world's difference. Yeah, I'm happy to see that guys like Ojomo, Keandre Coburn, Devondre Sweat are getting developed more where they weren't necessarily under the previous coaching staffs, defensive staffs at least. That's pretty much all I got for this one, though. I don't know if you had any. Like I said, pretty straightforward on this for Ojomo.
Yep, I think pretty straightforward. If you gotten this far, and if your team just drafted him in the 2023 NFL draft, I think you should be happy about this pick. It's a guy who's going to be on your roster. He's not going to be a guy that gets cut, and I think he's going to work. Andrew, you mentioned it, work his way into maybe second team reps by the back half of the season, and we'll see what happens from there. But overall, I'm excited to see what Ojomo does, and I think he's going to be a Texas X that lasts in the league for up to a decade, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely had the consistency from that perspective and the durability, without a doubt. I think, yeah. Anyway, I would say this is if you are an NFL fan watching this, and if you're looking for a guy to spend the least amount of time scouting and just get the basic scouting report and be happy with that, that's Ojomo. I don't think you should spend a whole lot of time wondering what if and how you can fit different schemes. I think that would be wasted time on your part. Just to put it simply. But anyway, yeah, I think that's it for this one. I believe the next one coming up is Anthony Cook. So we're digging more into the defensive backfield before we return to the defensive line, talking about Keandre Coburn and Bijan Robinson, the best player in the class from Texas. So for Andrew Miller and Shane Black at hookemheadlines.com, that's pretty much it.
Welcome.